What's up, Trekkies? It's your boy Will Wofford here with Trekker's Delight, a Star Trek-inspired podcast. Before we get started, we're going to give away $100, so make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to our channel where we will announce the lucky winner every single week. Now, welcome to Trekker's Delight.
And once again, that's an exciting offer. So again, like, subscribe, and comment, and let us know what you would like to hear and see on Trekker's Delight. So, Cogenitor, who wants to take it?
I'll go ahead and
Someone
run
else,
with it.
please. Yeah, I'll throw it.
All right.
Sound like mine is like somebody, not me.
Yeah, so this episode opens up, and we find the bridge crew of the NX-01 very excited to be in the close proximity to a hypergiant star, which they're going to study and start collecting data on as the first group of humans that have been this close to such a phenomenon. And Archer wants to get a little bit closer, but they tell him, our hull's already over 1,100 degrees. This is close as we're going to get.
Please,
without
Captain, don't fry us. Please.
Yeah,
Don't
serious
fry us in the
issues.
name of science.
Right. And then about that time, the sensors reveal that there's actually another ship about 20,000 kilometers closer in than they can get. So, of course, being curious, they hail the ship, and they find out that this is a race of people called the Visians. And they have special coating on their ship, special technology that allows them to get closer in to the sun. And but the captain, Dresic, I think is his name. Is that right? Hold on.
Drennick.
Sorry, Drennick, Captain Drennick, and there he is. Very friendly captain, and a lot of you may actually know him as Tomaluk from TNG, Romulan commander. But anyway, in this episode, he's a very friendly guy, very friendly species. They are on a mission, out on a mission to explore and meet new people and new civilizations. It just matches up perfectly with what the Federation's goals are all about. So they decide to get together and exchange crews, have them come on board their ship and check stuff out. We're going over to theirs, they're coming to ours, and we're letting them try different foods and stuff, and everything's just going swimmingly. They're very friendly people. But one of the things we find out, and you can see it in this picture here that's on the screen now, is that there are actually three sexes in the culture, in the Visian culture, male, female, and another sex that they just refer to as it. And we learn that this third species makes up only about 3% of the Visian population. And they don't really have their own homes, their own lives, or anything. They're almost treated like a pet, only really not as good as a pet. They're treated more like an object. And basically a couple will get assigned a cogenitor when they're ready to have a child. And then they have the child, and then the cogenitor just moves on and goes somewhere else. And we find out because Trip takes kind of an interest in this cogenitor, this third species or third sex, and he feels that they're not being treated right. They're just being treated like worthless objects, really. And so he meets with Dr. Phlox, and he wants to find out if this cogenitor species has the same mental capacity as the other two sexes on the planet, or if maybe there's some reason why they're not, being treated as equals. And so they do scans. They find out that this cogenitor sex is actually every bit as cognizant and capable of learning and cognitive development as the other two sexes. So Trip kind of goes rogue at this point, and yeah, the Captain Archer, he's taken off in a special pod with Captain Drennick, and this special pod has like double the protective coating of their spaceship, so it can go much deeper into the star's coronosphere to explore. So he takes him because this hypergiant is so huge, it's going to be a 3-day trip to go out here and do this exploration. So they go take off on that, and during these 3 days, when Captain Archer's gone, T'Pol's in command. She's busy doing her T'Pol stuff, and Trip's kind of off doing his own thing, and he decides that if this Cogenitor is actually capable of the same cognitive abilities as the other two sexes, which you see there, he's going to take it upon himself to try to educate that individual. So he brings her a pad that teaches her how to learn, how to read. Yeah. And so she starts doing that, and this species must be very bright because she picks it up in like less than a day. And pretty soon she's starting to read Shakespeare and a lot of stuff like that. And then he starts bringing her to his cabin and showing her movies. And so very quickly she goes from, almost not being able to know anything and just being pretty much mute at every conversation to actually being a vibrant individual and with desires of her own. And this is where things start to take a bad turn here, because she decides that she doesn't want to go back to the Vissian ship. She doesn't want to be treated that way anymore, which,
shocking.
Right.
Shocking, I say.
Very logical. I think every one of us, were we in that same boat, would have that same feeling. So she actually says she wants asylum on the ship. And so, of course, about this time, Archer's coming back to the ship, and they say, well, we got a major diplomatic incident here. So he goes back to NX-01, and T'Pol fills him in on what's going on. And of course, he's furious with Trip because he's interfered in this society's culture. Now, at this point, we don't have any kind of a prime directive for the Federation. And I think this episode really illustrates why something like the prime directive is important. Yeah. So, but the tragic part of this episode is, Archer has to decide if he's going to grant her this asylum, and he explains how that principle of asylum is important to us and how seriously we take that. But in the interest of diplomacy, he decides not to grant the request, and so the Cogenitor ends up going back to her ship, and Captain Drennick there contacts his Archer, says, thank you, I appreciate it. We're glad we have these diplomatic relations. We hope we can do more information exchanges and see much more of you guys. And off they go. And we think that's kind of the end of it. But then Archer's relaxing in his bunk, reading a book, and he gets a call from the bridge. Captain Drennick's on the line, and he's very upset. And the next thing we see is Archer here in his office, his ready room, with Trip, and he says the Cogenitor's dead. And Trip is like, what do you mean? What do you mean she's dead? How did she die? Well, she committed suicide because she couldn't stand, obviously, to go back to her old life and the way she had been treated before she learned about the fact that she could be an equal member of society with the other two sexes. And so you can tell Trip is just torn up about the whole thing, as you would be. And I think the reality of what he had done and what he tried to do really hit home in that scene. And, Archer kind of dismisses him, and Trip...
irritated.
He's irritated. He's just said, he said his final words, and Trip's just, kind of shocked, doesn't know what to say. And he says, Captain, but Archer just ignores him, and Trip walks off, and that's kind of where the episode ends. So, this is, I think, one of the to maybe the best episode of the second season of Enterprise, and brings up a lot of interesting discussion here as to how far you should go. Now, Archer brings up a good point, and I want everybody to weigh in on this. Archer brings up the point during the episode that, if we had run into something like this in Singapore or some other city on Earth where there was a group of people in that society that was, was equally sentient and conscious and capable of development as anybody else, and they were being treated like those, what would we do? We'd step in and we'd make a change. But, this is our world, and that is right. Do we have the right to make that kind of a judgment call for another species? And, let me throw it to Marie. What do you think, Marie?
I think this is a really, really good example of, why we need the Federation, honestly. Because while asylum is an important concept, Earth's really doesn't. Earth's a little bit actually out of power imbalance here. The Visians have been out longer, they have more advanced technology, and Earth doesn't really have any alliances outside of the cantankerous Vulcans. So they're looking, Archer's looking at this, and I think and as much as I hate it, I think he makes the right call here, from a statecraft perspective, not a moral perspective, mind you, but from a statecraft perspective. And it's that he is demonstrating to this other culture that he respects their culture, and that's why he doesn't grant the request. Now, in the aggregate, do I think this was the right call? No, I don't, because this is literally, the Cogenitor does everything they should do, right, in order to escape the situation in which they find themselves. They, ask for official asylum. They throw themselves on, the mercy of Starfleet.
Sure.
Right. They clearly are escaping a form of oppression, because I don't think you can get away from that.
Right.
The Visians literally look at the Cogenitors as being, lesser, and that's actually a comment that gets made about the Cogenitors, is that they are not as intelligent. So as a result, this treatment is more, for lack of a better term, humane. And that's what triggers Trip's kind of, spidey sense, right?
Yeah.
Before he goes all Florida man on the whole thing.
Well, let me qualify this a little bit, the question just a little bit, Marie. So Archer had to make a decision, and he can look at it from the point of what would be morally right or what's diplomatically right. And so he's got a tough choice to make there. But also, Trip had a choice. I think you told us what you think of what Archer's decision was, and that it was the politically, diplomatically, the right thing to do.
Do I think Trip should have met?
What do you think? Yeah, what do you think about Trip? Should he have meddled in? Was that his right to do?
Linda clearly doesn't think so.
No.
I also think this is a great episode that highlights the differences between being in command and not being in command.
Right.
Because Trip actually has a little bit more freedom to act than Archer does.
That's true.
And so Trip has, the freedom to have an opinion about this. Now, he has to obey a superior officer, yes, but at this particular point, there's nothing stopping him. There's no real reason for him not to engage. In fact, this is literally acting on his standing orders, which is to go and interact with other species.
Right.
And so that's what he's doing. So do I think he should? I do, actually. I do think that he needed to. I really do. I think he needed certainly to bring that situation to the attention of command, because that will then go back to Earth, and then we have a whole conversation about, hey guys, so let's talk the Visians.
Right.
and
Don't do that again.
Yeah, there's something a little not so great about them. They're really friendly, really friendly.
And we can learn a lot, but
Except,
all right.
and because I think that's valid information that you need going into it. If you decide to open up domestic relations, listen to me, diplomatic relationships with this particular species, and you'll note we never see the Visians again.
Right. Well, which maybe is appropriate. All right. Well, let's jump over to Manny if we could, because I'm interested in what he thinks on this, and then we'll hop down to my lieutenant commander down there.
Thank you. Thanks, man. Right off the top, like, I think that it's set up in the narrative, like everything's going just great until trips does his thing, and then whatever. There's a shocking juxtaposition with how sweet. It's really shocking how we go from this wonderful good time sort of like plot to smash cut, like everything is wrong. It's this really, really fast fall where things like start to feel really bad very quickly. And so the context of Enterprise in its mission must be taken into account. So they've had all these hostile species. They haven't really met that many like explorers. And then an advanced one at that who was like welcoming and friendly. This meant a lot to Archer. This is what he wanted. A lot of people on board had been pining for the first season to meet explorers. And so they finally meet this amazingly friendly race, and Trip does his thing. And let's talk about the implications of that. But my first impressions are that as a plot device, I enjoy the writing. Let's say that. I completely disagree.
Are we about to talk about Trip as a plot device?
Yeah, it is. It is. That's what I think it was. Like, I feel like it was set up in a way that was convenient. If we're talking about how realistic it would be for like an officer on a ship like that to... I mean, these are also indoctrinated Star Trek people, so their heads have been filled with the best of intentions.
Sure.
Oh, of course, and whatever. But Phlox reminded him, and so did T'Pol, stop putting your human values on top of things.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's where I'll throw to for Linda. Go ahead, Linda.
Okay. And if I can just jump in real quick before Linda does, I think that's what...
I mean, that's between you and God.
A jarring episode for those of us in the audience, because we know what the Federation's about. We've seen the original series. We've seen Next Gen, DS9, and Voyager, and we know it's all about embracing diversity, giving everyone an equal chance, putting everyone on a level playing field, and moving forward from that perspective. So from an audience perspective, it's easy to side with Trip and what he's doing there. And I think that is kind of what makes the ending so horrific, in that, she's sent back and she commits suicide. But anyway, Linda, I don't...
Yeah. No, we gotta get to Linda, because Linda...
my face over here is like...
Like, I'm a little afraid that you're going to shake your head off, actually.
Well, it was a hard one to watch because, again, we've been in the Star Trek for how many years? And I think probably you heard more about the Prime Directive on the Next Gen than anywhere else, and don't mess with other cultures. So it was hard to watch because, from the very first... Well, who is she? Or what is it? Well, doesn't it have rights too? The whole time, I'm watching, I'm going, no, stop. It was very hard to watch because we've learned all this, but then you have to forgive them because Enterprise was out there before any of that mode of you can't, Prime Directive, you can't involve yourself in anywhere else, which of course we've broken over and over and over again in Star Trek. but still,
it's really more of a Prime suggestion.
Right.
Yeah, right.
They're guidelines. They're really guidelines.
All right.
But, just seeing him start down this road of, I know where this is going to go. And this, she learns to read and he gets so excited and then it just spins out of control. And at the end, it did not at all surprise me that she ended up committing suicide, because she was shown something that she would never be able to have. So what's the purpose? It was very hard to watch. It really was. And Trip, I want to ask a question, and that is contrast and compare what Trip went through with it versus, I mean, what kind of a sleazy activity was going on with the, in the corridors while everybody was showing each other's engine back and forth?
Oh, you mean with
Linda watched a very different version of this episode than I've ever seen.
Well, no, she was referring to Dominic
Reed?
Keating.
Yeah.
Reed.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
Reed
Reed
just needs his own contact warning as soon as like some some creature that automatically like even vaguely looks female shows up. Like, I mean, somebody just needs to be like, bro,
have this piece of cheese.
Yeah, so
bro.
Yeah, so Malcolm Reed and what's her name, Velo from the Vissians, they're exchanging, sitting in a rec room somewhere, dining room, and he's got a whole plate of different very odorous cheeses. Because the Vissian species, they don't taste is not a primary sense for them. It's odor, it's scent. And so their food has very strong odors. And so they commented when they came on board the Enterprise that, the food was nice, but you have to try ours. It really has great aroma, strong scents and stuff. So anyway, Trip gets attracted to this Velo. Reed, sorry. Reed gets attracted to this Velo.
God bless Trip for many reasons. He's not
Here's the cheese scene.
Right. So they're
look at that. Oh.
Feeding each other different cheeses. And then she's their tactical officer. And so she tells Reed she'd like to get a look at his armaments.
There we go.
I think we have a new term there. And he said, well, as we like to say on my planet, I'll show you mine if you show me yours.
Yeah.
So those two are off kind of doing their own thing somewhere.
But I mean,
I'm okay
south.
with that. It's two consenting adults doing their own thing. That's fine.
But that could have gone south.
Yeah, but I mean, we wouldn't have been watching this. Like, this wouldn't have been the episode if that had gone south.
Right. And one thing's for certain. Well, I think it's for certain anyway. Without a cogenitor, he couldn't have gotten her pregnant.
Right. That's what I was thinking.
I mean, Trip also thought that, mind you. Trip also thought that. And we see how well it worked out for him.
So here's a little interesting
I'm going to stop you here. Because one of the things that has been kind of floating around is there's been this underlying assumption that the Prime Directive would forbid Trip from being involved. And I'm not persuaded that's true, because the Prime Directive applies, like, the triggering element of the Prime Directive is that it's a pre-warp society. It's not a pre-warp society. Neither one of these is a pre-warp society.
No, I don't think that's
interesting about Cogenitor, and especially interesting about it in terms of what we're doing on Trekker's Delight, is that this is really the first time that we've had a first contact experience with relatively on par societies.
In Enterprise?
Not forever, not generally, but like in terms of the episodes that we've selected for this particular shebang, and that's one of the reasons I picked this one. So the Prime Directive doesn't apply. I mean, even as
there is no Prime Directive
in Next Generation, even as it exists in the Next Generation, so there's no issue there. And I would also posit to you, or ask the question, what do you think Picard would have done here?
Yeah, that was going to be my question. We're
on the wavelength.
Yeah, we're on the same wavelength. My question was not only what would have Picard have done, but is there another Starfleet captain that you think might have given a different outcome than Archer did? Maybe offered and given her the Cogenitor sanctuary. But
I think literally
Like
all
the
of
captain
them.
from the Columbia.
yeah, I think, Marie, I think you're, though, a little off with the Prime Directive, because it does apply to any culture that Starfleet encounters.
It doesn't, though.
It
It
does.
Okay.
doesn't, because we
It
actually
does.
have we have a number of different kinds. Well, so first off, the Prime Directive itself is fluid. It's pretty much whatever the writers want it to be at any given point,
Sure.
which is kind of the problem. I really want somebody to like figure out and write it down because I would like to see what this looks like. But it's most generally applied and applicable in pre-warp civilization situations.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm looking at Memory Alpha, and it says the Prime Directive's core was the concept that Federation personnel should refrain from interfering in the natural, unassisted development of societies, even if such interference was well-intentioned.
Right, but that doesn't necessarily. But again, like
So
we're
they
talking
swore
about
to
development
uphold
of
the Prime
societies.
Directive, even at the cost of their own lives. But yeah, and so I mean, it can't just apply to pre-warp civilization. Pre-warp civilizations,
Yes.
there was supposed to be no contact with pre-warp civilizations.
Right.
Right.
Only
Not at all.
post-warp civilizations could you make contact with, and at that point, the Prime Directive
Right,
comes
but
into
you'll
play.
note that, like again, the Prime Directive is most often invoked in situations like, say, Who Watches the Watchers.
Right.
Well, yeah.
Right.
Yes, I want to believe that at this point there is no Prime Directive, and
No,
Archer
there
was
is not.
still-
This is a pure.
Yeah, we're agreeing to
context
that.
plot.
We're just saying,
And
down the
but I
road.
do like Danger's question, because Danger's question is do we think there are other captains in Starfleet that would have given
the captain of the Columbia. I forget her name. She was Archer's counterpart in the Columbia.
Oh yeah.
She was more. Archer was out there. Remember the first year that they went out there and he came back. And they had that conversation when he came back to.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
She asked him when they were on the cliffs. She's like, "What do you wish you'd had more of?" And he goes, "Weapons." I thought that was the most telling thing because they went out there with such good intentions to embrace. They're like, "No, why? What do you mean shields up? What do you mean? We don't need this.
Polarize the hull plating, guys.
We're fine. We're good." And it turns out like it's a hostile, black, nightmarish, inky death trap that like that Bones. Remember Bones in the 2009 movie?
That was
That's
literally
just what I was thinking of.
It's danger,
Right.
like it's danger and darkness wrapped in silence or something.
Yeah.
Yes.
Carl Urban did such a great job with that.
He does.
did.
He's the best.
Yeah.
But even beyond that, I think there's a really interesting question. Not just the question of Columbia, although I like that idea and I want to chase that down with you in a second.
Yes, love it.
What would Picard have done? What would have Sisko have done? What would have all of these others? I think Sisko might have come closest to Archer's solution, but I guarantee you, Janeway would have picked him up.
You think?
Picked him up and been like, "All right, no, that's not cool," because by the time by the time we get to TNG era, the 24th century, right? There's a much greater concept of inalienable rights of sentience.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's a question here that the Cogenitor's rights as a sentient being are being abused and violated left, right, and center. They are not even allowed basic personhood, guys.
Yeah.
And they don't seem to have a problem with that either.
No,
they
don't.
She just sat there. That was her place. Blah blah blah. It was Trip coming in and teaching her how to read that screwed that up.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's a question under there, right, that says, how, do we have a moral obligation to step in when the person themselves doesn't necessarily know that anything's wrong?
Right.
And I would actually argue that there are enough legal precedents that we do, that I'm pretty sure a lot of that would have been translated over into how the writers or, the Federation would address it.
There's a book that I read every year. It's The Narrative of Frederick Douglass. about his escape from like slavery. Americans had this thing, slavery, and the master-slave distinction. I'm reminded of that in this case, where they've they're so advanced, and yet they have this sentient species living amongst them, about 3% of their population. The enzymatic reactions that are involved with them are necessary. Why they haven't replicated these enzymatic reactions in a non-sentient species or have some other way of doing it talks to the sort of hidden traditionalism that might be in this culture. Regardless, why am I linking this to this? I mean, I'm pretty lit, but also what I want to reference is in Baltimore, when Frederick Douglass is moved from the South up, he gets transferred to this white lady's house, and she's a fine lady, and they have a nice home and whatever. And she tasks Fred to help her son read and all this stuff. And one day the husband comes home and rushes upon her and says, "What are you doing?" She's like, "Of course, and I'm teaching him how to read." She's like, "You can't give him an L. You give him an inch, he'll take an L," all this stuff. And in the book, Frederick describes how being a slave owner transformed her from a sweet lady into a monster because she was given responsibility, lordship over another human being.
It's very hard to look at the Cogenitor situation and not see it as a systemic oppression that's on purpose.
They pass around sentient beings.
Right. And there's no discussion of consent at all in any of this, right? No. And they don't have the option. So rather than, I mean, William mentioned, is this an analog to having a surrogate parent for a same-sex couple? And the answer is no, because the Cogenitor legitimately has no opportunity to consent.
It's more like a sex slave.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. No. And that's why I think that in this particular case, I really think Captain Picard would have granted asylum. But it's easier to do that when you have the might of the Federation, a galactic power, behind you.
True.
I hear where you're
going. And I think in thinking about Picard and Janeway,
and I think Janeway's cup of cares was so empty. Just kind of generally speaking,
she was so fastidious, though.
But I think she would have been. I mean,
I'm trying not to get us banned on YouTube, guys.
They both pretty much towed the line when it came to Federation, policy and stuff. And so I can see, though, both of them being furious, as in Janeway's case, to what Tom Paris had done. Because I see Tom Paris as sort of the Trip analog in this, right? I could see Tom Paris doing that, or maybe even Ensign Kim.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, Tom Paris done that. Do you guys remember? With the water planet?
With the water world, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, but both of them would have been furious with their...
there, right? And he was demoted, and I think he was incarcerated for 2 months.
30
That's
days.
a comparative slap on the wrist.
That's all she could do.
Right.
Yeah, I really get the feeling that Janeway did, Janeway gave him the minimum sentence she possibly could. And then as soon as he got out, they're like, "Hey, Aces, you're back on the bridge. And, wait a couple months and then we'll see about reinstating your lieutenanthood."
Yeah.
Happened in Discovery.
Kim was kind of Janeway's golden boy, though, I think.
Yeah.
But both of them, Picard and Janeway, they would have been furious with whichever officer had done what Trip had done. But I think in the long run, they would have asked that sentient being what they wanted. And if they wanted asylum, they would have granted it.
Marie's point is well taken. In the time of Picard, he is on the flagship, and the galactic
they can
power
afford to do that.
The Federation was steeped in its own tradition and laws and stuff like that, and so you can replace an officer very easily. This is a time when Archer, and I compare to the Xindi, the same thing when he had that time when he had to replace Trip or whatever. He's like, "I need my officer." we don't have a culture already of these irreplaceable engineers. Trip is a one-of-a-kind officer at this time. They don't even realize how valuable they are to each other yet, because they're far out. They're irreplaceable. Replacing Trip at this point. So he messed up, because this is someone who basically made a political stance out of and didn't realize the ramifications, the unintended consequences that would ripple out from this decision, which changed the whole tenor of the episode, which is my favorite part of the episode, by the way, is how the tenor changed. It's hard to say, well, how would another captain react? Those captains were steeped in the resources, tradition, and history of being able to replace anyone. I'll have to rethink
with the exception
the
of Janeway. With the exception of Janeway, as she's steeped in a different culture, she's steeped in and I think there's a valid point to be had here that, like I said, by the time the Federation is around, they've worked out like a general understanding of the rights of sentient beings.
Right. Right.
So, yeah, I mean, this is very, very realistically systemic oppression to keep an entire section of the species,
in sexual slavery.
I'm trying to come up with a word, and I'm dying here. They basically oppress this entire species to make sure that they are available for procreation.
Yeah. Did he say there was like 3% of their population?
Yeah, 3%.
Yeah. So these are, it's a naturally evolving population control mechanism, and so as a result, it makes sense for the other two genders who need these cogenitors to reproduce. It makes sense for these other two genders to evolve a culture where they have control over the cogenitors.
I wonder, as a parent, well, how do you feel when you have a child finally, and it's born of that sex that then becomes a sex slave? Basically.
I mean, because they got to come from somewhere, right?
I bet the state proxies them. They become property of the state.
Probably. Yeah.
I mean, wouldn't that kind of make them want to at least fight for their child in that respect?
It's not their. I bet they don't think of them as their child. I bet they think of them as property of the state. It's chattel.
Yeah. Oh, look, this is what I had. Thanks for the hard work.
The frequency of their birth must be demographically locked, because there's only so many of them that could be sustained in a population. Remember, they're fighting to keep them, right?
Yeah, and here's another question that brings to the forefront is
Harvey Weinstein equilibrium.
Is
Harvey?
What if you're a couple and you are only able to have the cogenitors because you reproduce, you have a cogenitor, you reproduce again, you have another cogenitor. At what point, because you see that sex is disposable, do you just kill them because you're afraid of the embarrassment of not being able to have a regular child?
There's a frequency equilibrium in all. It's called the P and Q equilibrium. It's the Harding-Weinstein equation. There's only so much of a certain frequency of a certain gene or allele that can be like in a population. If you only have 3% being born, let's say that they're like two recessives, that's only a quarter, and let's say there's 2Q, so Q squared. It's a mathematical formulation for how often it could occur in a population. The idea that you could have a parent that could have two in a row is infinitesimally small.
Right.
Very small. And let's just say it does happen, and you have someone who's, I bet they're compensated by the state. There's probably some sort of trade-off where you're paying into the state basically, or something, or you keep giving us progenitors.
But to answer your dangerous question, I don't think they would kill them, honestly, because I think they're valuable enough. Like, I mean, we're talking in terms of chattel, right? But this is very valuable chattel.
Yes.
I'm just wondering if the
like
parent, the other two sexes would be somehow stigmatized let's say there's a genetic defect in one of the other two sexes where they're just predisposed to have only congenitors for some reason, right? And would there be some sort of a stigma where, I mean, granted, based on the numbers, we're talking probably a very small percentage of anyone that would have a genetic defect ending up that way. But
I mean, at that point, this person is literally producing a valuable commodity.
True.
I mean, assuming Vissians have like a standard sort of capitalistic understanding of commodities and supply and demand, which is a big assumption.
Right.
We're also assuming that they have sex in the conventional way, or that they have birth in the conventional way. Like maybe cogenitors come as part of an afterbirth. Maybe they grow in a different way. Maybe they're not. Maybe they.
Yeah.
We think of them because they look humanoid. I'm just saying.
We're just little information. I mean, the Genii involve have eggs, so like.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, so I want to.
Here's kind of
back to the cogenitor is necessary. Like I don't know. I don't want to chase that down. I really don't.
I want to circle back to the first contact implications of the Vissians, which is really at the heart of this. And what do you do when you first encounter a culture that is it? I mean, they were amazing, like Archer was super impressed or whatever. And now you have one of your officers messing up the whole situation for you because of some cross-cultural nonsense. What do you do? What do you do as an officer? Well,
is it a cross-cultural nonsense situation though?
Tell me.
I don't think it is. I really fundamentally don't think this is cross-cultural nonsense. Wow. Cross-cultural nonsense is like whether or not you shake right hand or left. All right. Okay.
Okay.
We are literally talking about how they treat an entire sentient portion of their population.
We cannot throw human values on top of their system and judge them by that standard.
I'm not looking to throw. Well, first off, this is a TV show we're talking about. One. So it's actually it's the purpose of the story is to engage.
It's real.
Yeah. Hold on.
Yes, Linda.
Love it. But the point is to engage in that conversation. Like, what is the value here? Because Star Trek is really less about science fiction than it is about exploring and mirroring and forcing us to confront parts of our own value systems.
Agreed.
So what is this episode really trying to do? And I find it really telling that the very end of the episode, right? The very end is everybody's upset. like the Vissians are all upset, not because this congenitor has died, but because it has now this couple that was ready to have a child
gonna have their baby
and is gonna have to wait another couple years.
Bummer.
Guys.
Right. That's bad.
Guys.
That's very bad.
I mean, and so again, I really actually stand by my comment that I think it's a very valuable thing that we find this out. Because that sort of, that will dictate whether or not, like, what kind of relations we have, the Federation has, or Earth has with the Vissians. And we never see them again. Like, nobody brings the Vissians back.
Right.
We have gotten more Lurians in Lower Decks, Discovery than we have gotten. And y'all, Moore never had a line. Dude was a running joke.
Let me ask this question.
We don't get the Vissians.
This is gonna be a tough one.
They're all tough.
So this particular sex, this cogenitor sex on the planet, they don't really have a choice in this reproductive process. Could this be considered rape? And the question, I guess, the question kind of revolves around this. They are uneducated, so they're purposely kept in the dark as to their rights. In fact, they believe they don't have any rights. So they don't know that they have the ability to say no. Can someone be raped if they don't object to it? And would the Vissians be keeping them purposely ignorant so that they can't object to the sex? Because if they did object, obviously 3% is a small population to work with if that's all you've got to keep your species going. And if they allowed them to object to the sex and it was considered to be rape at that point, that would drop their reproductive rates even lower. So the question
you can 100% have rape.
What's that?
You can 100% have rape in the absence, like in the absence of any like active ability to consent or not. I mean, we as a society have already made that determination.
Right.
Like we literally have on the books, statutory rape situations, with the understanding that there is a certain age limit and age group that is incapable of consenting.
Right.
And that's, and keeping them to ignorant of their ability and teaching them that they're not able to consent is the same deal. Like, I mean, this is a violation, and this is a violation.
And I consider it to be the same type of situation if you had someone that was passed out drunk. They could not consent. They have no way to refuse you, and you force themselves on them. That is rape. So, in my mind, whether someone is actively able to refuse or not, it's still rape. And so, I think
we're gonna have to put so many trigger warnings on this video.
Yeah, for real.
I'm sorry. What's that?
We're gonna have to put so many trigger warnings on this video. Okay, trigger warning, enterprise. Trigger warning.
Right. And maybe this is why we never hear from the Vissians again, because that's how it gets back to the Federation, right? And they're like, well, that as long as they have that societal norm where they treat the cogenitors like this, we're not going to establish normal relations with them.
That's an
People learned our lesson.
They alienated them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Guys, I think we're anthropomorphizing and I'm not undercutting it or saying that these things of self-determination are wrong or whatever. I'm just saying, like, the lens that we're using is very human. And
yes, the lens that we are using to evaluate a made-up species, made up by women, listen to me, by humans, to talk to humans about their values.
Right.
Just going to toss that out there.
Nice.
Just going to toss that out there. But I do actually think that there is that we should, as like, if at some point it becomes real, right? Like we do reach the stars, we do discover an interstellar community of species. I do think that we should, if it doesn't exist, that we should advocate for a baseline for treatment of sentience.
Right.
For what?
I think that would have to be one of the fundamental values of the Federation, that any sentient life form has to be given a level playing field. They can't be treated lesser than any other member of that society's species.
Let me ask you guys about Ferengi females, for instance. If the Ferengi came into the Federation,
notably not members of the Federation,
but they eventually did become.
Yeah, eventually. But we know that is actually after Rom becomes Negus and starts instituting reforms inspired by Mugi.
And he lets them wear clothes. That was one of the
have pockets.
Yeah.
That have pockets, right? Like, I mean, I don't see him winning that battle with Lita, guys. Like, I don't see that happening.
In terms of this first contact, in terms of what he should have done, what any other captain would have done, it's a very ticklish question. Where did we bring up the rape word or whatever, which implies consent and which implies autonomy, which implies self-determination and consciousness in a way that we can understand, even though they're portrayed that way or whatever. This is a species, unlike our own, that requires a third sex in a certain frequency in order to maintain its population. It is unlike our own. It has no concept of consent for these people. They don't. What we think of as sex, which is titillation and so forth, may be just part of their purpose. So what I would liken it to, for instance, is a bumblebee. And I don't mean to be so facile. I'm just saying, like, a bee or an ant, goes through its life, whatever, and then it has to walk up and then impregnate the queen, right? And then it dies. It's its purpose. We don't say that
the drones are not sentient, Manny.
Right.
And also, like, I mean, this is more along the line. Literally, this is more along the lines of these two people have gotten together. These two have gotten together over here, and what they really need is a triad. And unfortunately, and rather than trying to like go through the dating process for this cogenitor, like, it's literally that they are just farming people out. This is much closer, I would argue, to The Handmaid's Tale than it is to a bumblebee.
I agree, and that's why I used the master slave distinction before, and I said, like, this is what it likens it to me, like, where you've commodified flesh. It's a flesh trade, and I see, but like
there's a reason we are referring to the individual as the cogenitor, right? Like, they don't have a name.
Yeah.
Right.
And I don't think we can overlook that.
I don't think it's a relationship thing, Will. Sorry. I know he's in the comments, so he's saying it's like a polyamorous relationship.
William asks if that should be a polyamorous relationship. Dude,
so
if you're going to ask questions, you need to be on camera. Just saying.
You don't think of every Vissian sexual encounter as a threesome?
Only if they're...
There we go.
It's not about... not every sexual encounter is intended for procreation. So, I would think is that the actual cogenitor sexual encounter, the procreative sex, probably is discernibly different than non-procreative sex.
And I think we've noticed that they are not in. If they're not a person per se, then you can't have them in a polyamorous relationship, because you can't be in a relationship with a log.
So we're arguing about personhood?
That's exactly what this is. That's been what this is about the whole time, is that, the cogenitor is a sentient being. Should that sentient being have personhood rights? And are we going
if they're sentient?
And
maybe their sentience is new.
And I think we established in the episode that the cogenitors are sentient. Like, they learned how to read in a day, as Danger pointed out.
Right.
You remember when when Phlox was arguing for the Menk, there were these two species on a planet that one of them was evolving up, one of them had an inborn genetic disorder. Mm-hmm. Hey, William, come on in, buddy.
We've got a number of a whole lot of Section 31 rocking right now.
Okay, what I was asking earlier was, because I'm in a place where I can talk now for like the last 6 minutes. And I got some Amazon stuff come in, so I got my my ankle weights and my waist trainer and all that, yeah. So anyway, I'm gonna go up. I can go up against a Klingon now, but anyway.
I was about to say, like, I legitimately thought those were like gauntlets that you were.
No, here's the thing.
I was like, that is awesome.
Any other arm weights, but these look so cool.
I was like, William has rocked.
Looks like you're gonna go against the Ninja Turtles.
Like, he is the Star Trek.
And they're really heavy too. They're really heavy. Anyway, that's the point. So what I was asking was, let's say we get past the rights issue of individuality for this species, for this third gender. Let's say we get past all that. I was asking, what should the end result be? Should it be a consensual surrogacy, or should it be a polyamorous relationship? That's what I was asking. Like, where are we going? Because obviously this species cannot procreate without a third gender or a third sex, or however they choose to address it. So that being said, if they don't have it, they'll obviously die out unless they go through scientific means to procreate their species.
And
So
Smanny pointed out that it speaks to traditionalism that they haven't.
So it's like you're advanced enough to fly into a sun, but you're not advanced enough to fly into yourselves. So, like, okay, kind of no different than what we're doing here. We're advanced enough to go into space, but we don't know what 90% of our planet underwater is like. It's a very common thing. So that's why I was asking, like, what is the end result here when we are? Let's just say we meet the species in Barnum's time. Or do they have three-way relationships? Do they
So what would it be if the Viskians were to apply to the Federation and meet the criteria to get in? Because currently I think they don't.
Oh, they don't. Not even close. No.
Because there's a requirement that you have a basic recognition of the rights of sentience in the Federation. So, all right. So what would that look like? Is a good question.
I hope I've been a good foil on this.
Yeah.
Controversial episode, and it brings up controversial questions, and that's why I say I feel like this episode in particular, even though it's first contact in every single way, I feel like it's definitely a cross between LGBT Trek and opposite Treks, because we're talking about a third gender who is being treated worse than an animal.
I really think I think the end goal would be to allow the Cogenitors, one, recognition of their sentience, and two, control over what they do, over to whom they offer their services.
Maybe there's some history
think
where
of,
they did
think
that.
of the power the Cogenitors would have if they were on a level rights playing field, level abilities playing field with everybody else in the society. The Cogenitors at that point have the say as to whether a particular couple is going to have offsprings or not.
It's like hotness in our
You
society.
then start to have a new ruling class.
I don't necessarily think that's true. I don't think that's how that would work.
Here's the thing. That right there is that fear anyway, I feel like from their part is why they purposely do not educate them.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that is for sure why.
That's a possible future that they're worried about. Doesn't necessarily mean they'll get there, but that's a possible future. I see that as a possible future if they assume their individuality and uniqueness in their mindset, and they're saying, you know what? Now I can see that. I can see them doing that as like a boycott issue. Like, we're not going to do this for you. We're not doing this for you until you treat us like this. Otherwise, you ain't. We may as well die out. Like.
Right.
Yeah, no, I think that would make more sense.
Yes,
and that would make more sense as a flex for because there's no reason to chuck out the rest of the all parts of the society, and ultimately that wouldn't help the Cogenitors either. So I don't see this as I think that's kind of like it's a slippery slope argument that doesn't quite work, because
the evolutionary biology argument
that the Cogenitors would then act the same way that as their oppressors, and we've got enough background data to indicate that that's not usually what happens.
Maybe this happened with this one Cogenitor in this one situation, but it may not be indicative of that population. So let's say in an evolutionary biology situation, right, you have a sense and sensation, you have a feedback loop, and you've evolved a species that you require for some sort of enzymatic process. Maybe you have to involve them somehow in your, let's say, conventional lovemaking, and it's incredibly pleasurable for them. It has to be, because that would have been the evolutionary tract or trajectory for a species like this, so that you would have more and more and more and more. Those who weren't would have been left off, and mutations would have pushed and pushed them into that realm. So now you have a population that isn't consenting in as much as has an inner fulfillment by being in this role, simply because the genetic programming has predestined them.
I have a question.
Yes.
I feel like this is a really too deep hole to get into when we're already at the hour mark.
I'm sorry.
Okay, just one more question. Just one more. I swear, just last one for the day. Okay, Manny, would you imply that because this is apparent, they've implied in that this species, this is their natural way of development. Okay, let's say that. Would you say that this third gender, I can't even bring myself to call it a cogenitor, that this third gender is operating based solely on instinct?
Probably not solely, but it's probably we're probably seeing the cogenitor in an evolved sentient state, but probably that has been low key sentience that they didn't see until very recent, maybe the last couple hundred or 1,000 years, where they've hidden their sentience.
Okay.
And like they probably weren't always sentient. Let's say the last 10,000 to 100,000 years they've become sentient, but they've become docile and pliant. And this is where I think Marie's point's valid. Like now that they've evolved sentience, consent is an issue. Whereas probably before they were chattel and just physical beings who were just being used as a part of the process, let's say.
I mean, I'm going to point out that when the original Star Trek was airing, I would have been one step above chattel.
One step above chattel?
Yeah.
As a woman in that society at that time?
Like there's a whole discussion about like, you know, when women got the right to open their own credit card accounts, bank accounts, blah, blah, blah.
1970s. Believe it or not.
And how long was it before women and correct me if I'm wrong here, but even had a say as to whether or not they could become fixed not to have children without the approval of a male, their husband or whatever. And
when did we start acknowledging spousal rape as a crime, right?
Right.
So and I can guarantee you, Manny, women did not evolve necessarily to be docile.
I'm not saying it's a woman, but I hear what you're saying.
No, but I'm saying we have we're drawing on parallels, right? Because again, not a species, and we're literally talking about and mirroring our value systems.
If we're talking about that, and I mean, I capitulate completely. I think it's.
And my other question would be, how different would all of your answers be if they had cast a male identifying actor as the cogenitor and coded the cogenitor as male?
Good question.
I mean, I'm saying these things independent of any of the actors or actresses. But yes, I hear what you're saying.
I feel if I could answer the question, because gender as I'm taught today is not related to sex necessarily, I don't think it would matter. If the person identified as male, but
I mean, would we still be as sympathetic to the Visians?
I don't think so.
I'll have to agree with you. I have to agree with you. I don't know, and I don't understand the experience, so I will say that like I'm just seeing it from a mathematical point of view.
Right. I mean, it kind of goes back to the Outcast, when they decided who they were going to cast as the Janai, and they cast almost, I think, exclusively female actors, and they coded them like and in the story as being more feminine than more masculine. And you know that doesn't have to be true, right? Like, I mean, you can have androgyny that skews masculine.
Yeah.
But part of that was because they, you know, like they wanted it. They had this statement they had to make, but they wanted to make it as palatable as possible. But my question is like the reverse here would be an interesting situation to explore. Like, if in your head, because Danger actually slipped into this, right? I mean, because he started using female pronouns with the cogenitor, and so the question becomes, if that character had been more strongly coded male, how would that have changed the episode? And I'm just as bad as the rest of y'all. Now we're 5 minutes over.
I think it would have definitely dramatically changed the episode, but as far as how I view the situation, I don't think that would have changed. I don't think
changed it for me.
It doesn't.
Me personally.
Yeah, right. And I can only Manny can speak for Manny, and William can speak. We're all speaking for our different because it's a controversial topic. But given at the end of the day, again, from what I've been taught recently, that gender doesn't have anything to do with the sex you are born with. I would have to say that even though the show itself, the episode might change, the characterization might change, how the captain talks to Trip might change. That doesn't negate the fact that this viewpoint here, I hate it. I hate all of it. I hate the entire thing. I can't stand it.
It's a terrible episode.
It's terrible. It's just that is not in question. That's not an issue. What's here is we have no prime directive. We and it's literally an open playing field. Like, what do we do? How do we go about it? You know what I'm saying? I don't know if I would have. I put in the comments earlier, and then I'm quiet.
I saw, yeah. I kind of want to throw to Linda because she had an interesting reaction to like how it would be coded if it was different, if it was male or female.
Yeah, please go ahead,
Linda.
I just feel that if it had been coded male instead, I'm not sure we would have the immediate knee-jerk reaction we already. I mean, this is hard to put into words, but I feel like having it coded as a female, I immediately have a knee-jerk reaction to a female being oppressed. Okay, right. Because that just triggers something in my same-sexness.
Understood.
But, yeah,
I love it. Brain sexness. I like it. I like it.
I don't like. What are my words? But
words are hard, man. Words are hard.
They are, man. But as far as if it was a guy, I don't mean to feel this way, and I don't mean to talk like this, but I think they had a better chance of getting out of that situation they were in because they have more power if they're a guy.
And that's where I'm going is there's an implicit bias.
Yeah, definitely.
I agree with you.
Really quite deal with in the
I just don't perceive it the same way. I mean,
that's good. Maybe it's because I'm American.
No, I think that
I'm an American woman. So.
I've heard it enough times from women, and I have to believe it, that they're really. And so for me, because I'm the odd duck or whatever, like I'm watching it and I'm seeing it. I'm not seeing a male or female. I'm thinking third. Like I'm actually like suspending belief, and I'm actually seeing like it. And whoever the actor or actress is the idea of it from it. And I'm seeing it from a biological view. What is it over millions of years that evolved this species in the dynamics and the inner dynamics and the work and the mathematical equations that would have like relegated them to a certain way of copulation and then procreation.
Right.
But in the real world, I agree with Marie. I agree with Linda. I see how this could be coded in a certain way. And I don't want to delegitimize or minimize those feelings. And so I will agree with you completely. It's just that my perception is that I don't care who's the actor or actress that's playing it. I think about like how this story is kind of unfolding. And to me, it was super weak. I mean, the whole part of it is weak. It's a weak story. And so...
and yet here we are arguing about it 10 minutes over time.
As a first contact mission or whatever, I was very upset with Trip. I thought he should have had more discipline. Let's just say whatever. Like that is... The whole thing was ruined by Trip trying to bring fire to the natives, by trying to give reading. Here, I will teach you. This is the privilege that I have.
It's not Pygmalion, guys.
Literacy, yes.
Honestly, and I have to say this, to bring up Marie's point on several LGBT Trek episodes that we've done in the past, and a few FTP episodes as well. Can we? We're 10 minutes over. I will shut up after this. I swear to God, I will.
I heard that before.
I know, but like this time, I'm for real. So look, I feel like we're overlooking the fact, or at least I feel like we are, that Trip is not acting on what could be right, but what is right for him. Is he doing this what's right for the Cogenitor or what's right for his feelings?
That's a good point.
And that's something that I have to ask, because Marie and I brought up in several of our past shows that certain male dominating figures act on their feelings and everything is all shindig and good.
Exactly.
I feel like Trip is acting on that, and we haven't looked at him and his actions for doing that, because now the third gender is dead. And while I understand it and I get it, to the point of, some of my ancestors throwing themselves off the ship to keep from coming to the Americas and all of that. I understand it. I get it. It's a plausible ending, but Trip should have known better. He absolutely should have known better, because now it's just like saying, oh, I low-key have a crush on this third gender who I'm pretending is a she, even though she hasn't identified herself as a she to me yet. So therefore, I'm going to act on my feelings and try to give her a type of emotional...
He wants to save her.
For sure. Trip suffers very strongly from white knight syndrome.
That's
however, can I throw a bone to the writers on this one?
Yeah.
And then we really have to wrap up, guys.
Yeah.
We're going to be talking about this for an hour and a half. I think that's actually the point of Malcolm, and the whole evolution of what's going on with Malcolm, because Malcolm's interest is very obviously sleazy. I mean, like I said, Malcolm Reed just literally needs a trigger warning, like as soon as he comes out, like that. But I think the point of that is, and I think the point of kind of like having that in the story is to highlight that that's not what Trip is doing. Like, this is not the situation that we had in The Outcast, where Riker was interested in pursuing a romantic relationship with the alien. I don't think that's what's going on for Trip. I think Trip is literally looking at this going, y'all, that ain't right.
Right. I agree.
Yeah.
So I can see being disappointed in Trip from, like a diplomatic perspective, for sure. I can see being disappointed in him in terms of... But then again, he doesn't really violate a whole lot of direct orders, does he? Really?
I mean, because it's like you could be doing the right things for the wrong reasons.
He thought he was doing the right thing. He's been brought up in a culture that says, of course we're doing this. So my captain would love me to do this, whatever. And then it turns out that he's completely messed up diplomatic relations.
But,
he doesn't have the larger picture. He doesn't have the training. He doesn't understand the implications.
And that's what I'm saying. It's like there are better ways to do this. I'm not saying he was wrong. What he did, but what I am saying is, me, if I were in Trip's shoes, I would, me knowing that there is no prime directive, create you a spatial underground railroad and make a way for them to get. I don't know,
and the thing is, Trip knew what he was doing was wrong because he lied to the Visians about where he was going. He was going to go to the break room to get something to eat, and instead he went to their cabin and started educating her how to read. So he knew he was lying. He knew what he was doing was wrong.
I don't know that it's... I don't know that that's true. I think he knew that the Visians would have considered it wrong.
Right.
Well, again, because right and wrong is relative to it's subject to any species how they define right and wrong. Just like there's technically no up or down. We define up and down until we leave Earth.
Also, can we just as a blanket, Trekker's Delight advocates rights for sentience?
We do.
Can we just put that across the board?
Right.
I think there are certain, to quote our extremely racist forefathers, there are certain inalienable rights.
Yep.
It's so really hard to look at this episode and not look at it through a human lens, because the human lens is quite literally all we know. And that's all we were raised with. And each of us that'll say, which makes Trekkers Delight interesting, is that we each have a very unique perspective on how this looks from a scientific one to a LGBT one to a woman one to a male one to a black one and to a white one. So it's like there are many different perspectives, and I appreciate that. But we are in hour 15. And you know that usually means that the conversation was good. So
right. Somewhere like Jermaine's eye is twitching and he doesn't know why.
Jermaine, you did this 5 months ago. You did this. Like, you should have known when you made that post the ripple effect that it would have on the space-time continuum. You should have known.
So thank you guys very much for being a part of this panel and making this such an interesting and really cool episode of Trekker's Delight as we explored the Cogenitor. Thank you guys certainly for watching this long. Especially if you don't know us personally. Just throwing that out there. Yeah. So, as always, like, subscribe, comment, let us know what you would like to see going forward, and I hope you continue to stay with us for our First Contact Day celebration. Bye, guys!
Live long and prosper.
Bye.
Now, again, I'm going to say this again because we're near the end of our show. If you are our allies, we are not talking to you. We are not talking to you. This does not... Pop. Okay? We're not talking to you. Stop trying to take our and make it your goddamn business. It ain't got nothing to do with you. It ain't got nothing to do with you.
Our experience of grief independently.
Bruh.
Yes.
I love that they're in the comments.
So much is like, I'm just reading the comments.
Yeah. They should brought their child out. Such a good point, Will. God, that's such a good point. And he's really thought about it too. You should be here. William, get over here.
I thought he had a girlfriend on Insta. It's been ages since I've mucked about, but.
Okay, moving on. Let's move on.
Yeah, we gotta move on.